Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member Calgary Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I'll be splitting my time on this speech with the minister from Kildonan St. Paul. Member. Minister. Madam Speaker, if I had to choose a heading for this year's speech from the throne, I would choose the Prime Minister's byline, not a time for austerity. I like it for so many reasons, particularly in relation to what is happening in our world. I like to get to the root of things, so I went to the source and found the applicable definition of austerity as it relates to the economy, and it is this: enforced or extreme economy, especially on a national scale. Given what our nation is facing, I couldn't agree more with that course of action. Canadians need to be sure that this government will address the real problem that is facing this country immediately, and that is a worldwide pandemic that is costing millions of lives around the world. For all of us that serve Canadians at this unique time in history, it is our duty to ensure that we do our utmost to provide the environment that minimizes the toll the virus takes on the lives of Canadians. First of all, the instruments of government are there for us to mitigate the adverse health outcomes, and we must use all these resources and fund them to the level required to address the Canadian health system's response to this pandemic. Secondly, we need to mitigate any long-term damage that would occur as Canadians feel the effects of the shutdown of parts of our economy necessitated by our response to the virus. Parts of Canada's economy have responded well after the initial shutdown. Sadly, parts of our economy will take years to recover to the same level they were at prior to March of this year. It's our job to ensure that we remove the structural impediments to survival of these industries so that the costs of insolvency and restart are minimized, because that affects us all. In addition, the people in those industries, those who have trained to excel in their chosen field, need to have clarity as to how we emerge from this pandemic, although the when is still not clear. Foregoing a life of effort and investment, both personal and financial, is not the chosen outcome. Addressing these two objectives austerely would be the wrong approach. Then I look at our government's response to the pandemic and the economic turmoil our country has experienced thus far this year. Government programs have expended twice as much as was lost in income. Hastily designed response programs that throw Canadian taxpayer money at the wall to see what sticks. Several failed responses that have missed the target for helping those we need to help. Covering up incompetence on program execution and design with the taxpayer's wallet, resulting in the highest unemployment rate in the G7 group of advanced countries, and the most spending per capita in this group of Canada's peers. Call it what we want, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, my apologies. Eventually, results matter, and the report card on this government's performance is dismal. We all recognize that mistakes have been made in our response to this pandemic and its economic outcome. And we accept that mistakes happen when governments need to move very quickly to address an urgent situation. But it is incumbent upon us to take what we've learned thus far and not continue with the same mistakes going forward. That is not austerity, that is common sense. I don't know why this government confuses the two. Let me move to how this speech from the throne fails. This was deemed so necessary that a make-believe parliament, barely sitting, had to prorogue in the middle of the summer. Failure one, misleading Canadians on fiscal sustainability. Here are the incoherent statements on financial stability contained in the speech from the throne. I quote, "With interest rates so low, central banks can only do so much to help." Quote two, "This government will preserve Canada's fiscal advantage and continue to be guided by values of sustainability and prudence." Quote three, "Governments can do so while also locking in the low cost of borrowing for decades to come." Well, considering that this country's central bank, the Bank of Canada, has increased its balance sheet almost five-fold in the past 6 months to over $500 billion, keeping interest rates low only works because the only buyer of our country's bonds is the Crown Corporation we own. That is, our debt is being mispriced, and Canadians are bearing not just that balance sheet, but also that excessive risk. Tell me, what happens when this independent central bank says that they will no longer buy the debt being issued by the Government of Canada? And by the way, something they weren't doing at scale until this year. Is the Government of Canada now subject to the whims of the Governor of the Bank of Canada? An independent central bank suddenly became a very powerful central bank. How about this statement in the speech from the throne? I quote, "Maintaining a commitment to fiscal sustainability and economic growth as the foundation for a strong and vibrant economy." We've been spending beyond our means for every year of this government's mandate, and now we've been unprepared for an unusual event. The government's latest response? Abandon anything resembling a fiscal anchor and replace the finance minister. Well, at least someone got fired for all this financial nonsense. As much as I agree that someone had to be accountable for the fiscal mess this government has created for this country, I sense strongly that the person pulling the trigger in that action is the real problem. Failure number 2. Build Back Better is an overreach at this critical time in our nation's history. First of all, recycling American gimmickry is political sloganeering that should require royalty payment to the producers. The statement is beyond trite. Canada has always built upon our strengths, and our Canadian resource industries lead the world in environmental standards. This overreach, costed by many in the hundreds of billions of dollars, provides no accountability for a tangible environmental outcome, and its scale is only being considered because of the pandemic. As in, why let a good crisis go to waste? It talks of millions of jobs and echoes the same nonsense put forth in the late Ontario Liberal government's green energy strategy. No surprise, Madam Speaker, the plan has the same architects. And let me ask, who are the main beneficiaries of an industry that will pay half the Canadian corporate tax rate? Once again, accountability, please. Where in Ontario are the hundreds of thousands of jobs, these new clean energy jobs that were promised as part of the increase in power costs in Ontario, that has done its fair part to move jobs out of Canada? This part of the throne speech needs to be called out for what it is. It is a job selection and subsidization mechanism, as in government saying that they like transferring taxpayer funds from productive parts of Canada's economy to parts of the economy that have more influence with this government. It is insider influence at its worst, and this government has shown it is a master practitioner. Their friends win, Canadian taxpayers lose. What's left out? The Canadian resource industry. Let me start again with a quote from the speech from the throne. I quote, "Canada cannot reach net zero without the know-how of the energy sector, including people in places like British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador. These far-flung places?" The writer of this part of the speech from the throne should be sent to the hinterlands to find that we are all Canadians with the same desires to build a great country and contributing to our businesses, our families, and our communities. And finally, I quote again, "The government will support manufacturing, natural resource, and energy sectors as they work to transform to meet a net zero future, creating good-paying and long-lasting jobs." Well, Madam Speaker, if there's one consistently oxymoronic thought pattern I hear in Ottawa from members of the government, it is this notion that we have to retrain our country's best scientists, engineers, and technicians, all while saying we need to follow the science. Our industries are adjusting to a low-carbon world. This government is the only inconsistent factor in getting to a viable outcome. And I caution the government on their actions in this regard. Tempers are rising. People do not believe you are acting with integrity or common sense. The government has no representation in 2 of Canada's most productive provinces. Be careful what you are doing to this country. I can tell you very clearly there's more strain in this.
Questions and comments to the chair and not to the individual member or to the government. Thank you.
Here.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Fleetwood Port Port Kells.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. For a second there, I almost thought that the honourable member might have to go back and be re-educated like the finance critic for the Conservative Party, because I hear compassion, I hear let's get it done from their leader, but now I hear true austerity. We hear that national unity seems to be all wrapped up in the energy sector. And we can understand, the angst being felt in Alberta. But the new Conservative leader has spent time in Quebec saying that he'll honor Quebec's view that no new pipeline should go through there. It sounds like the Conservative Party is going through a transformation, but it has one foot on the boat and one foot on the dock. And I think they're going to end up in the water.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
I thank my honourable colleague for the question. And as you know, Madam Speaker, I arrived in Ottawa in the last election, so I've been here for almost a year, and I've been through much of the re-education that's part of this, part of the Liberal government's strategy to kind of show us how Canada really runs. But Madam Speaker, I represent a great riding, and I have an education that I arrived here with. I have a life experience, and I don't think I need a re-education on what the economy happens across Canada, especially in some of the resource-producing regions. But I appreciate that the member on the opposite side would like to re-educate me and on how I should be thinking about jobs in Canada and the Canadian economy. And I guess he and I can have that debate as long as we want. Thank you.
Commentaire, l'honorable député de Jonquière.
Questions and comments, the honourable member for Jonquière. The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to commend my colleague from Calgary Centre for his speech. It was very well thought through, very well presented. There's a new leader in the Conservative Party, and there's a sort of a love story with the Quebecers, but I fear that it's going to turn into speed dating. Now, there are subjects that we will never in the Bloc Québécois agree on with the Conservatives, for example, oil. But there is a glimmer of hope when I hear them talk about employment, for example. And I would like to hear my colleague talk about the aeronautics sector, because that is a sector that has 43,000 excellent jobs in Quebec, and we're the third largest aerospace sector in the world, and obviously it was left aside in this throne speech. I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say about that, because it's important for Quebecers. Thank you very much.
Calgary Centre.
Merci, Madame. Je remercie mon...
Thank you, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Quebec, and I agree with him that the aeronautics sector is at the heart of Quebec, and I think it's at the heart of Canada as well. It's very important for people across this country. Now, I don't know whether it was mentioned in the throne speech, but I know how important it is for the Quebec constituents, and I'd like to thank him for his question.